Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Danny and I have been good friends for many years and have worked on this project for a long time. And like a lot of you, because we started with seven, everybody's migrating to eight now. So we're going to be talking about different strategies of how to get existing content into eight, nine, 2.0, whatever you're most comfortable calling it with the current stack. We'll be focusing mostly on pulling information in from Islandora 7 installations, but data's data, right? So we've got a spreadsheet. We'll talk about how to get spreadsheets of your old data in, and in most cases that's going to be coming from a Drupal 7 install, but not always. It can be we can bring it in from other places. I did a big one for somebody moving over from bpress recently. Most of what we're talking about, even if it's never been in a repository before, we'll be able to move this in. Oh, there's a couple of things that we've been through a bunch of these now, and I've probably done 10 migrations in the last year, some of them quite small, some of them quite large. And there's a few lessons that we've learned as we go along. There's a few gotchas that we'll be talking about later. But what we found is really important is in your general approach, you've got to be collaborative. So you're working with your repository managers. I very often know exactly what the repository manager needs, and they disagree quite strongly. So it's good to have those conversations. And both sides need to recognize from the start that they're not automatically right. Sometimes the repository manager will ask you to do something that, while you can do it, just either doesn't make sense or is very expensive in terms of time and resources. And if there's an easier way, you can point it out to them. And sometimes they will tell you, awesome, let's do it. And sometimes they'll say, no, you're totally wrong, and this is why. So you've got to work together on this, and agile, nothing to do with the name of the agency that I do most of my work for. But you've got to be responsive. You've got to change. So don't. Way back when I studied project management years ago, we talked about the waterfall method. When nobody will tell you about the waterfall method, it was actually designed, this is serious, it was designed as an example to explain how you should never develop. It just makes no sense. You're saying at the start, you need to know what all the outputs are going to be, and you don't know, things change. So it's you can get very hardwired into this. You can't move back, you can't make changes. So little steps, little increments, see where you're going, check and see if you got what you want, just go back and forth. Especially in the early stages, don't do anything that can't be undone easily. Do your initial work in a staging environment so you can clean it up afterwards. And above all else, be super flexible about all this. It's if you come in with hard ideas, you're not going to have a good time. Oh, first question, what are you trying to accomplish? And it seems pretty basic, like, why did you even ask that question? And you'd be surprised at the differences. So do you want to replicate the old site? And something we don't talk about a whole lot is we spent a lot of time making Islandora 7 pretty nice. There's some fantastic sites out there. And they're not getting rid of them because they're old and clunky and stupid. They're getting rid of them because everything's been deprecated. So sometimes you want to replicate that site almost as closely as you can, and sometimes you want to start with something fresh. And that's there's almost always going to be new theming involved. This is something that astonishes me, is just how trendy the look and feel is. Something that was cutting edge 5 years ago just looks kind of stale now. And depending on your institution, depending on what you want, sometimes stale is fine. Most of us who've been in the business for a while remember interfaces that were almost embarrassingly clunky, and almost deliberately so. Right? You want to say, I'm a hardcore developer, I don't want pretty stuff, I'm just going to have this ugly interface that works. So figure out what you want to look like, figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Do you want to just move the data across? Do you want to embellish the data? This is an opportunity. I always suggest that when you are moving data across, this is a perfect time to clean it up. This is a perfect time to get rid of all the nonsense that's been in there. Something I think everybody's seen is you're querying your old data to see what's there. Just query anything that's got test in the title and see how much garbage comes up. It's kind of amazing. So you have to build all those filters in. So decide in advance what it is that you want to do. And harkening back to the previous slide, be flexible about that. You could say, I've got this wonderful idea of what it is that I want to do. And once you're into it, you'll come to a better idea. And I think of this as being more akin to renovating an old house than building a new one. So when you're renovating an old house, you've got this idea and you get in there, and sometimes things are better than you thought, sometimes they're worse than you thought, usually worse. So this is a good chance to kind of go through and shore up those weak points that you didn't even know were weak points. Of course, when you're coming up with strategy is, are you going to repeat this? And this is something we've, who's the Russian author who said that all happy families are the same, all unhappy families are different? It's come up with a basic scheme that's going to work for most things. So if you've got something that's going to be repeated, if you've got a multi-site, then you really want to nail stuff down. And it's one of the things that I really like about migrations is that I'm allowed to do cowboy coding again. So it doesn't matter if it passes spec, it doesn't matter if it's properly aligned, it doesn't matter if it's properly commented, and if it's passed peer review, either it works or it doesn't. It's going to run once. And does it run on another data set? Possibly, maybe not, who cares, doesn't matter, you're just trying to get this stuff in. So with the, I'll show you some of the Python code that I've written later for cleaning things up. And it's kind of a mess, but it totally works. Not super transportable because if you want it to run, you've sort of got to know a guy. But it's fun and it's easy and it's light. So and what I found with some of the things that I've done is that I modify it slightly for the next job, modify it slightly for the next job, and then you start to see patterns. And then you say, you know what, I can harden this off. I'm sticking this in a separate file. This is going to be configured from now on. You know, something that we've done. Oh, I started with a rewrite on Workbench, and if any of you have done any work on Workbench, Mark Jordan is kind of the best guy ever to work with. He accepts new ideas. You can write something today, it's going to be in prod by tomorrow. But what we did there is noticing patterns. So we started with a couple of config options, and we're up to about 40 of them now. And it used to be that when you put a config in, it would have to be hard-coded someplace, and then you have to put sensible defaults all over the place, and it was impossible to follow. So once we recognized that pattern, then took the whole thing, put it in an object-oriented class. So you've now got a config. If you want to put something new in, it goes in one place. And then every time and then when you go back to the main code to use that config, you can just say, if it's there, do this, because you put a sensible default in. So it's each config option is it's in a YAML file because we don't code anymore. We just write YAML files, and it's all key value pairs. And you say for this key, this is the default value, and the default value on a new config is usually do nothing at all. But if you want in your config file, which needn't be complete, right? Because when you write your configs now, you only put in the things you want to change from the default. The defaults stay there, so it makes everything nice and simple, makes it straightforward. And if you want a custom behavior, it's a piece of cake to integrate. So back to the original point of, is this going to be repeated, is the more times you're going to repeat something and the more people involved, then the harder you want the code to be, the better commented you want it to be. If you're going to be looking at your own code a month from now, for God's sakes, put some comments in. Or you're going to look and say, why did I do that? I'm going to take that out. And then it breaks. And anyway, we've all been down that little road before.
Because in 1 month you have become like this much better of a programmer. So then you look back at it and you're like, oh,
yeah, no. Yeah. So again, what's your goal? And again, pretty straightforward. It's almost the same as what are you trying to accomplish, but not exactly. When you're done, do you want to have a finished site that's ready to run? Do you want to have a site that's ready to turn over to themers? Figure out where you are at what point. And just like, these aren't great big deals. These are just things to think about when you're doing the preparation. Any migration you want to spend a good bit of time preparing for, talking to all the interested parties. So we've typically got at least a month's work to do before you move your first object. Just analyzing the data, figuring out what it is, where do you want to go, how do you want to display this, what are you going to do with it in the meantime? This is a big question that's come up a few times when you're examining your old data and figuring out, when you say, is some data better than no data? So if you've got a bunch of objects and some of them have dates and some of them don't, you have to think about if you're going to bring over any dates at all. If you're doing a search and you say how many of these things were written in 1929, and you can say for sure that 17 of them were definitely written in 1929. There's a whole bunch of others you have no idea. So talk to the scholars involved and find out how they want to analyze this data. Do they want incomplete data sets? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it's easy to accommodate. Careful with a lot of clients that if you put in some data, then they want complete data sets for everything, whether it was there in the original or not. So again, come with pretty good understanding with your clients, with the people you're dealing with, even if you are your own client. Come to a good understanding of where that data is coming from, and can it be figured out, can it not be? The EDTF dates are excellent example in that anything can be mitigated. I mean, the beauty of this whole process is you suck your old data out and then you clean it up and then you blow it back in. And sometimes there's nothing to it, maybe cleaning up a little bit of punctuation, looking for spaces, looking for random characters that shouldn't be there. But dates in particular, there are so many different ways of expressing that. And sometimes you can come up with a pattern. You can say in every single date we express this way. This is the EDTF standard, so you can write a converter pretty easily. But it's really common to have dates go in as date fields, and you'll see it expressed 100 different ways. And then the question is who's going to clean this up? Ideally a grad student. But if you're going to do it, then you have to explain to the client that this is going to cost you developers time to do monkey work. And maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not. But there can be a whole lot of time spent on that.
Talk about it later. And there's other slides about it, but you have to ask whether or not you're willing to go through the dreaded second pass after you're done, So it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah, there's slides about this later.
So what does your data look like? This is what we've been talking about so far. Where's it coming from? What kind of shape is it in? Sometimes it's excellent. One of the things I like about dealing with larger universities, which is most of the work I do, is they've had people looking at this for a long time. The data's in pretty good shape. And sometimes you get there and it's just a mess. And this is a really good time to clean it up. So these, some of you have seen these slides before. You start out with a whole lot of ducks in the air. They're totally disorganized. Your job is to get them all lined up, find the outliers, and get them ready. This is just before the barbecue. Oh, actual techniques. And I think we're kind of hoping that we can throw this open to a discussion. There's a lot of people in this room who have at least as much experience as we do. I don't think anybody's manning the,
I'll check.
Danny, I'll check, see if there's anybody has any questions come in or anything that they would like to comment on. I'm actually going to put you on the spot now, Danny. You did a lot of work with the migration module.
Yeah.
That I have very little experience with. So if you'd like to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of that.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I can speak to the disadvantages, I guess. Like, that's the easy thing that comes to mind. Well, anything you write, you immediately know everything you hate about it. But, so no one's asked anything, although someone online did know the full story apparently.
Oh, okay.
So Drupal migrate, if you want to use the migrate framework, you can definitely do that. That's what I would call more of like a power user way of doing it. It's super flexible. You can do just about anything with it. It's got room for you to like slide in your own plugins, so it can be very extensible. But it's very hard to debug. If you're in the middle of that process and something goes wrong, it's really hard to get that information out. And the trade-off for being super flexible is you have to do everything yourself. So there's a lot of stuff where it's like Workbench is if you took something like Drupal migrate and you added a convention to it that everyone followed, then it immediately cuts out like a lot of the work. So if you had a CSV and you were using Drupal migrate, you would have to tell it, here's where the CSV is. It's got commas that are separating it, you know, like you've got to go, you got to like hold its hand and tell it kind of everything. As opposed to Workbench, which you don't have the level of flexibility, you're kind of locked in, but you're locked into something very sensible. And I find generally it works easier. Like at Born Digital, we use Workbench, you know, so we've evaluated what we did there. And in terms of being able to get non-technical people to like fire off the migration, to get them to work with the data and get in there and mess with the CSVs and kind of everything else, it just works out better. Mostly also because Workbench doesn't have to run on the server, so you can run it on your machine. That means there isn't a non-technical person who has been tasked with like updating the spreadsheet, and then they have to figure out how to get it like onto the server. You know, like sometimes that can be a challenge. So yeah, that's about it. Sorry, those are my rambly thoughts about these two things here. But I would, if it were me, I would definitely take Workbench. Yeah, what's up, Seth?
About the only reason you use the migrate module is if you're dealing with non-CSV data. Like you're being handed a pile of JSON objects or a pile of XML. You can do that in migrate. Again, the people who you're working with who aren't technical aren't going to be able to do it. But, you know, if they can't easily stick it into a CSV, you can work with it that way.
Yeah, if you've got anything going on the back end at all, Python is just awesome for taking XML and JSON and converting it to CSVs. And I don't love CSVs, but it's kind of the patois that we all speak. So it's an easy way of getting them in and out, and they are human readable. And the other huge advantage that Danny was just talking about, the disadvantages of moving spreadsheets around. Workbench reads Google Sheets, and they're with a caveat. But it means all you have to do is just share that sheet and you can read it and you can bring it in. So it's with the same config file, you can test on your laptop and then push the whole thing up. It's for those of you who haven't used it, it's Workbench is a Python app that runs anywhere and everything's runs over REST. So if I'm doing something in Africa, I bring those assets over here, I transform them and fire them back, and that's time consuming. Uses up a lot of bandwidth if I'm moving, especially JPEGs or especially TIFFs, especially videos. It's moving a lot of stuff around, but you can do your testing and then run the exact same config anywhere in the world on any machine that's got Python installed. So what I tend to do is I do the testing on my laptop where I can run it with a debugger and I can go through line by line, make sure everything's working nicely, and then run it on the actual server that it's going on. So you're not moving stuff as far, it's much, much faster. And you've got it means that anyone can do it. It means I can set it up for a client and say, when you're ready, touch this button. The logs are all stored on the server where you've got good access to them and they're safe. So it's extremely flexible like that. And some issues with all the various Python versions, but it's not a huge deal. Even if you don't want to convert your entire server, you can set up a virtual environment on your server. We what is it? It's 3.8 minimum now to run some of the new libraries.
I'm seeing a question here from Rebel asking. Are you asking for where do we look for errors in Workbench, or where do we look for errors in the thing that? Workbench for site administrators, but hope to use migration to pull in Islandora 7. But I guess I was specifically asking which tool you were asking about. So I guess Workbench for errors. So, oh, okay. So she's saying we have over 20 sites. So just in general, errors in migration. Or you'll get the logs and you'll look at the logs. Workbench is very nice and it will actually give you output and it will write out a log for you to check. There's a lot of auditing that you have to do afterwards. We talk about this in a further slide, and there's ways that you can, thanks to Seth, actually, right here in the audience, there's ways that you can use a view to check to see whether or not things made it.
Just crawl through the database.
Yeah, yeah, like it's so nice for that views filter. It's amazing. Yeah. Oh, not Workbench. We have over 20 sites, so errors in migration. Oh, from Claw? Well, I mean, you'll get the logs there, and it'll tell you stuff. Migrate 7x Claw. So I was going to mention that, so we were going to bring that up. So first off, you're not strictly required to use it to get stuff out of your 7x. I know that you can point Workbench at your 7x, and it will pull the file down. Migrate 7x Claw, it does the technique that like Seth mentioned. So the time where it's good to use the migrate framework from Drupal is if you have non-CSV stuff. So migrate 7x Claw like pulls Foxaml straight from a Fedora 3 and tries to use the Foxaml and parse it. Found that that was incredibly slow. We wrote it around a lot of it to use Solar. Even then, we still found it to be very slow. I know I've heard murmurs of folks just taking the entire Fedora data store from Fedora 3, like the data stream store and the Foxaml store. I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. And just make a copy of that and crawl that and feed that in to migrate 7x. Or just however you're pulling it out, but that you're parsing that directly. I know that'll work faster, but then you've got to have double the space if you make a copy and stuff. So, sorry, I'm rambling here. What I would say for folks at FLVC, I would probably stay away from migrate 7x Claw, and I would look to see if you can figure out how, if you've already got your data in 7x parsed into Solar, you essentially have most of what you need to get everything into Workbench. There can be times where you might run into some trouble, where there might be some dependencies or complicated structures, but most of the time you can get it out that way. And that's in terms of 7x Claw, I don't know if anyone's even used it for the past like 2 years. What's up, Luke?
I guess I was going to mention that we have a way that at first we were exporting it all like archival Foxaml, so you would have for complicated though, like to date, like
Why don't you come up here and say that? No one can hear you. That's what all that's saying. No one can hear you. Luke Taylor, come on down. You're the next unwitting participant in Danny and Alan's workshop. All right. Yeah, there.
okay. I was just saying
It's
it.
this one.
This one. Okay.
Picking you up too, so.
I was just saying at Discovery Guard, we actually use Drupal migrate, and we read Foxaml for the actual migration, and we do so over NFS. So we have an NFS mount as read-only, and which contains the object store and data stream store, and then we do the migration directly from it. We used to have to do archival exports of Foxaml, which would mean that you have to have double the amount of space, but since we now we actually read it just directly through the fly system off a mount. Given that it is using migrate, it's pretty complex to set up. So to date, only our developers have been the ones setting it up. It's not, I wouldn't call it completely user-friendly, but we've had pretty good success with it. One concern I've had over Solar to be aware of for people is make sure everything is actually indexed in Solar, because I've run into times where Solar has been missing stuff. So I guess that's one thing just to be aware of if you're using something that's querying Solar. Yeah, and we also use, for CSV ingests, we also make use of the Drupal migrate, but again, ours are somewhat complicated because we use paragraphs,
Oh, okay, yeah.
which leads to a bit of complexity when you're trying to work with the CSVs, because we have to use a lot of delimiters. I don't know if anybody's any questions. I'm not going to hijack your thing.
No, that's great. Thanks for coming up and talking
Awesome.
so that everyone could hear. I see folks from FLVC are talking about, yes, they have many terabytes of data. So we talk about that, and what Luke was talking about, you know, they've managed to find a way at Discovery Garden to avoid having to make a copy of it, so you don't have that. But there's like, and we talk about this more later, you always still have to have double the space for at least some point in time. Like at some point in time, you've got all your stuff over here, and you're gonna have all of it over there, and make sure it's okay, and then you get to offload one. But like at some point in time, they both exist. So like if you've got 20 terabytes, just like be prepared, you know, like you're gonna have. What's up?
That is an excellent question, and that's one that's bitten us a few times. If you have, the only way that Workbench can read it, you can't pass authentication along on the fly. So it has to be open in order for Workbench to pull it back. So in a few cases where I've had sensitive stuff, what we do is late at night, we restrict that, we take it offline. For most folks, we open it up, restricted by IP, so I've got a static IP. So I'm the only IP anywhere that can read that. So take that and then grab it and then open it up again after you've reverted the exact policies. And you can either do that collection by collection. You could there's different ways of handling that, but in my experience, for the most part, there's not been that much restricted data. There's been some, and that is the back door. That's the workaround. You just have to shut it down, open it up, grab the data, and then lock it down again.
I'll just, yeah. Thanks, Gavin. Repeat the question for folks. So, was asking about what do you do if your 7x is locked down with exact mole policies?
And again, for just to get it on record, the whole trick is to restrict it by IP, or I haven't tried this. I don't see any reason they could make it internally available in any case. In any case, there's talk to your sysadmin. There's many ways of making stuff unavailable except to a select few. Without using exactable policies. So do that, grab your data, and then lock it down again. And then there's a couple of different strategies for locking it down. We don't have exactMol in Islandora 2, but there are other ways of locking it down.
Slide?
Yeah, let's see where we're at. So yeah, this is identifying the current structure. So we haven't really talked too much about it, but within Workbench, there is a submodule that should maybe be split off into its own app and just called i7 Migrate. And what that does is it goes in and you grab the data from your i7 using a config file, which is similar to but not identical to the Workbench config file. So in that, you're going to put in the Solar server that you want to get to, and you're going to put in, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. It gets out of the box without touching it. It brings back every single Solar field and then makes a query. So you get a spreadsheet with every field you've got in Solar. And a lot of you think that's going to be kind of ugly when you see it, but in fact, when you see it, it's even uglier than that. It's especially with because it brings back every field, right? So if you've got books, and every page has its own Solar field that's used exactly once. You can have you can have a query. Well, I think the record I saw was a query that was about 45K long, which is a little bit more than Post wants to deal with. But it at least gives you kind of a head start. So I've switched that up a couple of different ways. One is you can specify the fields with wildcards that you want. And I've talked about this to a couple of people here already. I'm astonished at the number of migrations I've done that the repository managers are very happy with 100% of their information coming from the transformed DC stream. So they took all the effort to put it into mods, and that gets transmogrified back to Dublin Core, and they're saying, yep, that's all we need. We've got our contributors, we've got our source, we've got our dates, and so I usually put that in as a start, and then add the specific fields that I need after that, and there's two different ways you can do that in config. So one is you can specify, and I won't go over it in too gory detail because this is all very well documented through Workbench. But you can go in and you can specify exactly what fields that you'd like, and you can bring those back. And if anybody's using the ancestor field, that tends to make life a whole lot simpler. The other thing you can do is you can go into the Solar interface, the UI, and you can tweak around till you get exactly the query you want. Then you can copy and paste that into a file, the query. You can paste that file as an argument into the get i7 content, and it will run that query instead and bring back exactly what you want. So that's going to bring that back. So that brings all the fields back except rels ext. And rels ext, I go in and I pull that stream back as XML and parse that out, and that's returned as an object to the actual executable, and you can pull out whatever value from that that you need. So there's a few standard ones we get. We get sequence number, we get content type, we get collection ID, a few things like that.
Is that all handled by the submodule, or is
Yep.
this your custom stuff? Okay.
No, this is all built in. So this was all custom work that I'd done, and it's now been integrated back into core. And we did the exact same thing there of taking the config and making it into a separate object that's pretty easy to manipulate. So if you want to fork Workbench, super easy to do. The odds are extremely high if it's something that's useful to you, it's going to be useful to the community. So throw it back and it'll be in prod in no time. So what I will do when I'm bringing these back, just to manage assets, if you've got the ancestors in place, that's fantastic, because then you just take your collection, use that as your ancestor. You get the collections, you get the sub collections. So you can bring it back. I don't really like to deal with more than about 10,000 objects at a time. You can absolutely do it, but that's a reasonable limit. So as you go through your data, if you pull back by content type, maybe that you can bring back all your images, all your PDFs, all your whatevers. You can split that down. You can bring it down by collection membership, and on one site that I worked with, they didn't use ancestor, but they used namespace. They say, bring me everything back that's namespace like this. And within the way I've got the config set up for the i7 harvest, you can put in literally any solar filter at all, including ranges. So you can say, I want all the PIDs between 1,000 and 20,000. You can really parse it out. So you can bring it back like that. My normal technique, especially if ancestors isn't there, is I start with the collection style objects. So that's going to be collections, it's going to be compound objects, it's going to be books, it's going to be newspapers, it's going to be page content. And even on a very large repository, it's going to be unusual if you've got more than a few thousand of those. So then I get all those containers, and the containers are, because they have the is member of relationship, they know how to nest themselves. You just put that in as a field. So then I ingest those into the new site, and they kind of become the framework. And one of the nice things about Workbench is it's got very good logging, which you can tweak on your own, but it also has the option of producing a file that has the NID to PID relationships. What I do is I take those and I stick those in an SQLite database, and then this, if you haven't used it, there's an interesting, slightly confusing feature with Workbench that you can give it a parent ID, or you can give it its ID. So once you've ingested a collection type object, you can use the identifier from that object as the parent object for other things that fall behind it in the spreadsheet. So you don't have to know in advance, and it's a little bit confusing to talk about, but so I'd refer you to the documentation on that. But it means that what I do is that once I've got this mapping, when I'm creating my spreadsheets for the subsequent mapping, I can put the actual NID in that it's to be a member of, because I know what that is. I pulled it back from the PID. So if the object that I have has is a member of Islandora root, I can go to my database and pull out and say, well, Islandora root is mapped to node 17, stick 17 in, and then you have a job that can be interrupted. You can do it in chunks. So if you've got 60,000 members of your spreadsheet, you can just break that down into 6 different spreadsheets. Or you can stick in all 60,000, and when it fails at 15,000, you can tell from the logs exactly where it failed, delete those and start over again. So it gives you a whole lot of flexibility there, and you can put in whatever information you like. The other thing about Workbench, and this is one of its super nice features, is that whenever you do any ingest, it will automatically remember everything that's gone in at that time. And when you've discovered you really shouldn't have done that, you can roll it back super easy. And it's got a feature that Islandora doesn't have that it should have. If you can delete a node and its media in one step, so you don't have to go through and do all kinds of weird filtering stuff.
Jim's got a question. Let me repeat that.
Yep.
Jim's asking if we use the PIDs basically just to track everything, if that's really the identifier.
Yeah, and if you're migrating from i7, that's built in. It's guaranteed unique. It's easy to manage. From another source, you can name your ID, and you can generate those automatically. So they needn't be meaningful. On a number of the migrations I've done, we have saved the PID as a field for historical reasons. So that's where this came from, and that's sometimes handy for other stuff. And in at least one, we brought it over to validate the data and then deleted the field because we're never going to need it again. Yeah, that's a super easy way of dealing with things. And depending on how stuff was ingested, you absolutely don't want to count on this unless you've done your homework in the first place. But very often PIDs within a range will define a complete collection. Very often they don't, so don't fall into that trap. But if it's a super handy way of dealing with it. Yeah.
This might have been spoken about. The way to route.
Yeah. Let me rephrase the question or repeat the question. So Will's asking, basically, if you can replicate the URL structure and make everything look the same. So like it's yes, but with caveats. And I'm just saying that because I haven't personally done it. So I don't want to just like get out there and start doing the hand waving thing, right? But when you migrate over from 7, the PID comes over, and there is a field in the basic, content type that is field PID. And so it will get there and it will have its PID associated with it. At that point, you can use Path Auto and give it the tokens for like field PID or whatever, and you can force it to match the URL structure. I think there is some weird issue with it not liking colons, which unfortunately is in every single PID. And so like, I know we've got to do some kind of weird thing to mitigate that. And I don't know if someone's figured that out yet, or if that's just like a, you know, TBD type thing. But yeah, so there is a way. I just don't think anyone has actually 100% pulled it off yet.
So Drupal with PIDs and the paths, I mean with the colons and the paths, the colon will still work. It just won't write it out when you link to another object. It will just encode URL encode that colon.
Right.
So it's not consistent. Colon will work, but Drupal won't reproduce it for you.
Okay. Yeah, what's up, Will?
So I mean, like, I guess like I personally might care about it being one way. Like I don't hold the base URLs
Right.
to work and drop.
So then it should work, I guess, if you can live with the constraints that Seth laid out, then it will work. So I'll recant my hand waving and say,
Can you do
yes.
that?
Yeah, you can recant hand
I
waving,
didn't
that's
know
the
that.
thing.
Well, that's what we've done that, yeah, because I know we've done on the
Yeah, okay. Confirmation that it worked fine at Lyrasis and probably at Discovery Garden as well, so, okay. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that there is that thing that anybody experienced with Islandora, if they see the /Islandora/object/PID, you're going to assume you're on a 7 instance and nothing's changed. But we use handles a bit. You know, if you really need to lock something down to a given URL. But there is that thing. This URL used to bring me to this asset, and it doesn't anymore. And that's just a nuisance.
like handle.net.
Have you, yeah, have you ever had to set up a handle server?
Oh, all the time.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah, that had worked.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
long as the PID was stored.
Sorry, I'll repeat that again. So Alex just pointed out that you know, you could write a very simple controller that would do all of that stuff for you if we wound up having significant issues with Drupal Path Auto. Yeah. I guess we should probably move on to another slide here. I don't know where we are with time, but I just for the identify current structure thing, I think one of the key takeaways here is that you've got to keep it small when you start. And you know, Alan mentioned he doesn't like to do more than 10,000. I would even be like, I don't want to do more than 1,000 at the beginning. And there's there's like basically you have a 0% chance of getting it right the first time. And so like you have to look at it and try again. And there's just a lot of lather, rinse, repeating that you're going to have to do, and you're going to want to do that on something small. And usually it ends up being like, what is your smallest collection? You know, you need some kind of like
Your smallest
unit that makes sense that you can pull out.
Your smallest typical collection.
Yeah.
Because you've always got that small one that works perfectly. You say, yeah, we use all different conventions for that one. One of your biggest friends in this is Control C and rollback. So you can run off the first 2 or 3. Now Workbench has a check flag you can put in. So you set up the job exactly as you want it with --config and your config file. And for God's sakes, keep all your configs in the same directory. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. And then --check after that. And it won't actually ingest anything. It'll just go through and tell you if everything is cromulent or not. And
Cromulent?
oh yeah.
Okay. I'll have to look that up later.
Simpsons season 4. So it's as you get it lined up, it is super slow. It can actually take longer than the actual ingest. So what I tend to use it for is you run it and it will at least let you know some of the more obvious things. It'll spit out a list of all the fields you've referenced that don't exist. So you can create all 8 of those, because I haven't seen a job yet that the Islandora repository content type works out of the box. It's an awesome starting place. And then you add the 5 or 6 different fields that you need after that, which is easily done and documented. And then that will stay on that. So you run the first few, and it will let you know if the taxonomies you want to exist. You can set it up so it will create new taxonomy terms for you. Or if you want to work from a controlled vocabulary, it will tell you that's not there, you can't use it. It'll check out the term reference. It'll give you a good check. So typically, you set up a small batch, you run it, and you get your results back. And after that, you just try it. And if you start to see errors, then find out where they came from, stop it, and start it all over again. So we're talking here about the inputs. That's the Workbench i7, which is continuing. I would not recommend it at this point for a non-developer, although it's not particularly difficult to use, and super easy to modify. I mean, this is the beauty of Python. Nothing's compiled. It's easy to look at. You can go in, you can just try stuff out. But especially when you're harvesting, if the job all goes sideways, it makes no difference. You've lost nothing. So what that will do is that will create the CSV for you, and it'll create a log. So my workflow is I use the Workbench i7 to grab that CSV, and it will come back, and it'll give you all the data you need if you've set it up right, and the column headers will be the solar fields. So then it's kind of simple within Python. Python's got some really good CSV libraries. So you open up a reader, and then inside that reader, you open up a writer. So you grab the CSV, you read it line by line. You take each line and you change the header. So what I do is I have a utilities thing where I've set up a mapping. So I say, if this is the header in the original spreadsheet, this is the header that I want for Drupal. So you're going to change like dc.title to just plain title, dc.source to field_source. To prepare that spreadsheet for you. So you can just go through line by line. You can get all your mappings done. And this is where it gets fun. This is where you get all that weird stuff that you're not really anticipating. So you can just start hacking away. So for linked agents, I find out what linked agents they want. I can just throw that in as a simple loop. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, we can't here. If anybody wants to see the code afterwards, I can show you some of the things I've done with that. But this is literally just building up strings. You know what you want. You've got your information coming in. If you've got one of the things that I will do is set up a routine. So anything which is, if I'm bringing in taxonomy terms that are comma separated, I'll replace the comma with a double bar, or sorry, single bar. Which will then be split out as multiple entries in the same field. You can make sure that any commas in your data are properly escaped, so you're not trying to create new fields where there aren't any. So you just generally go through and clean it up, and that's where you have total control. I tend to do it, I use PyCharm, which is an IDE, and I use it almost as a graphic interface. So I can go in, and it's got an excellent built-in debugger. There's no xdebug nonsense. You just say debug and it starts debugging. So you can go through line by line and find out exactly where you are and what your content is, the state of it, what needs to be changed. And these jobs run really fast. Even if I'm doing I think the biggest one I've done so far was a 60,000 line spreadsheet, and it runs in about 20 seconds. So it's super fast. You can go through, you can see everything is when you're getting that one weird upside down duck, you're not sure where it came from. You just set up a little loop saying if data equals upside down duck, then stop. You put your break in there and it lets you know exactly what object's causing that, what the problem is. So it's super easy to debug and figure out. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Do you use any of the ETL
The question is, do we use Python ETL pipeline tools? I personally don't. But I mean, this is the beauty of this. It's cowboy coding. Do whatever you like. It doesn't have to be repeatable. It's going to be whatever works for you at the time.
You just gotta get the spreadsheet in the right shape, and that's
And there is another,
The code. Okay.
what is it?
Someone's saying show us the code.
All right, let me see how I do this. It's,
While he's looking for that, I'll say, like, so the process that he just outlined, I have done by hand, right? And if by hand when you're going across the columns and picking what you want and what you don't want, you might get something that will approach the limit of the maximum number of columns that Excel will handle, you know, but like you can fire it up, look at it, and you generally know the convention of how the solar fields were named in 7, so you already know, like, all right, well, I just want all of the MSs or something. Like, give me the underscore MSs and the underscore Ds, and like I can kind of go with that and just run with it. And so it's pretty easy to do that. But when you get to where you're cleaning up the actual spreadsheet, that's, you know, unless you're a human robot, you basically have to program something. There's no way you're going to go through 60,000 lines. This is the technical track, so it's okay for me to say that. So.
I'm doing that.
Code, is that visible for the Zoom folks?
I'll see if I can embiggen that. There is no embiggenator.
Control plus is not
No.
good enough characters. Okay.
All right. Yeah, so I'll just show you this, and this is won no beauty contests lately. But it gets it done. So I've got some utilities. I'm not even using SQLite on this particular application anymore. This is the one. So, okay, so this is, so I've got some tables here. This is just a quick and dirty way of building some linked agents. For those, there is a gotcha in Python that a surprising number of people don't know. And if you're looking for, if you're dealing with any structure and you're looking sort of with a key, and you're looking for a key that's not there, it will crash on you very badly. If, however, you just say like row get, and it's not there, it just returns a false, doesn't crash. So always use this instead of sticking it in brackets. So what this does is this gets the mod's name part multi-string for the creator, and if the creator exists, we're going to replace escaped commas with a couple of tildes, because we're assuming that no right person would ever put that in their code. Then we
Sure. Sure.
But this is the tilde project. We have them everywhere. Yeah, right. So so then split on the comma, and then for each one that's been split, we build this up as a string with relators, CTB :person, which is what the client wanted in this particular case, and then we get rid of those escaped commas and replace them with the commas that we should have had in the first place. So again, nothing elegant. There's no error checking. Either it works or it doesn't. And then here's the and here's the basic thing that happens. So we come in and we're going to open our input file as a CS file. Then we set up a reader. The headers are from field mappings. Field mappings comes from the utility value, and that's just the where I've taken what I talked about before, where we've got the solar field and we've mapped them to the new field. So those are new headers. Almost everything I'm putting in here is coming from that spreadsheet, but not everything. So I just stick a few extra fields on by appending them to the headers. So things that I've extracted from other parts that go in, and then just start running through. Also I build it up by models here, so that as I'm creating the new lines, I can sort them by model types, so put them in order. There's no point in trying to put a page in until you've got the page content to stick it in. So this is just filtering. Then once I've gone that for row in reader, so for every row that's being read, I create a new row, and that's when I just start monkeying around with values. Just grab them, clean them up, convert EDTFs, I'm getting my, the field member of, I want to get rid of that info Fedora thing, which isn't particularly useful. And this is for one that if the key was filed for this, for the OCR, it's replace OBJ with full text. So that's when you go out and you grab the asset. We were reasonably consistent with i7. Almost every object is OBJ, but not all of them. There's some PDFs out there. There's some other stuff you have to get. So you just have to be aware of that and make those changes on the fly. Then I get sub collections, so I can blast those out. Got a thing here for full title. It was two of the projects I was working on had comically large titles, and Drupal has a hard limit of 255 characters. So I do the text wrap shorten to take that down to 255. And text wrap is it's a Python library, and it finds the last word that falls within the 255 limit, or whatever you set your limit for. And the placeholders, we've got the ellipsis there, but you can put in whatever you like. So what I tend to do is I truncate it, and I use that for the title, and then for the full title, which goes in as a separate field, which you may want discoverable. You can actually use that for display instead, and make that as long as you like. The last iteration I did of this, oddly, they wanted the abstract to be used as the full title. So piece of cake to set it up. You just say full title, grab the abstract. We're done.
We got 30 minutes left here.
All right. So yeah, that's the basic code, and I do not have that on a public GitHub right now because most of what I have in there's a certain amount of proprietary information. But that'll give you the model, and it's not particularly difficult to put together. And if anybody's doing that, they have any questions, ping me on Slack. I'm more than happy to share the work that I've done.
It sounds like Carrie's gonna hunt you down there.
All right. Where to find me?
Alan accepts beer.
I do.
Only if he shares it with me.
Username now.
What's that?
Carrie just had to put a lot of tildes in his.
See, that's for filtering Carrie out. That's why I do that. Okay, so I need to stop share. Maybe I just could have done new share screen.
I think while Alan's navigating this, if you do ever run into that title deal, at some point in time, you have to do some kind of like shortened version and then a longer version. There's a third-party module that'll try to do that, where it'll give you like a display title or whatever and automatically copy it over and stuff. But then even that will then fall prey to the same limitations. So like you just need to like, whatever you're doing, you're gonna have to go in there and hack the length of that field somehow. So like if you're gonna make a copy of a title, like make it full text. Like just save yourself the problem.
Yeah.
Like right then and there and make it full text instead of just like a regular string. And there's a node, it's got a horrible name that doesn't actually tell you what it does. But I think it's like node title length or something like that. But there's a module you can use, and like some programmers look at it and they're just disgusted and aghast at what it does, because it like 1000%, it just like hacks the database. Like it just like pierces the veil, does all the things Drupal tells you not to do, and it just goes right in there and manually manipulates the database table to say, this can now take 5,000 characters.
Real titles, like, you know, where I work at, where I found.
Alex is seconding making everything full text. Okay, sorry, I was just rambling while you were doing stuff here.
Yep, no, so it works. They're just talking about getting the inputs, and most of what I do, not 100%, but most of what I do is Workbench. The bpress that I moved over, bpress has got a pretty good API. So you could go in and say, I request these, it comes back as a CSV, and then you clean that one up. And sometimes you've just got original data. We've got one of the collections we did recently. It was literally a bunch of grad students sitting down filling in CSVs. which is my personal vision of hell, but not my problem.
Grad students are for.
Oh, yeah.
No offense, grad students. No offense. You are cheap labor.
Cheap suggests there can be something for it. So the so once you've got your harvested data, we just talked about some bespoke Python. You can muck about with that as you like, and it needn't be Python. It can be any language you feel like. Makes no difference. And the other thing we overlook a lot is built-in spreadsheet functions can be super powerful. Right, you can go in there. It's the it was one of the ones we did for the Whitman project, where they had accidentally put in OBJ instead of PDF on an entire spreadsheet. So we could have, that was like hunt and replace. There's nothing to it. There's a lot of stuff built into your spreadsheet that you can use. Just make sure you keep the finished copy. The nice thing about doing it with code is you've got that code and you can rerun it. So this is kind of a one-shot deal. But the spreadsheet functions are great. There was one, I did recently, and we had to change it, and it wasn't huge, but it was big enough. It was about 6,000 lines. And in that, there was a total of about 18 dates that were malformed. So I cleaned those up by hand, but it takes a while because you run it, and you check it, and you go back and forth and back and forth. So then when something else was discovered, they wanted a different field mapped to something else. Instead of redoing that, I copied the entire spreadsheet and then made the new one, and then copied just that column, which hadn't changed, back to the first one. So this is a spreadsheet function that just stick it someplace and then stick it back. But it just made life a whole lot easier. So you're going to want to prepare a content type to hold your transform data. Most of the time, you're going to start with the Islandora repository content type because it's not bad. It's all encompassing. The first thing I do when I get that form is start rearranging stuff the way it comes out of the box. You've got your mandatory fields at opposite ends of the form, so there's a whole lot of scrolling. So I tend to stick those all together at the front. It just makes navigation a little bit easier. On most applications, I find you fill in the first 3 lines and the last 3 lines, and there's about an acre in between that you don't touch. So you get set up fields for single values. I use entity references wherever possible. So for your people, for addresses, for taxonomy, anything that's going to be repeated makes it more searchable, makes it more taggable, makes it easier to change later. If you've got, just for cleanup, there's, Seth, you're talking about the term merge module, which is problematic. There's another one out there, I'll look that up, that's really good. You can go through it because if you've got a bunch of terms that are similar, you can consolidate those back. And is this what you really mean? The other thing that works super well is VBOs are amazingly powerful. So you can set up a view. You say anytime it says foo, I'd much rather it said bar, piece of cake. One click and you're done. So you can move a lot of data around that way.
I've got a trick I'll share later too. If you get big enough in data, that trick won't work. And so there's some settings I've found that you've got to tweak. You got to say it's like sufficiently large, which quite big. Like, for most stuff, if you're doing like 1,000 things, 10,000 things, like you're fine. But you go throw VBO at 1,000,000 things, and you're gonna watch it start to have a hard time.
I had to change a fairly large data set, and it would handle 6,000 objects if there were only 6,000. If there were more than 6,000, you had to do them 1,000 at a time.
Okay, yeah, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What the hell? So inversion of data is something that I talk about. Sometimes when you're organizing your data, it makes sense to kind of express it backwards. So if you've got a maybe the best way to put this, if you've got one of the things with XML is XML is nested and CSVs are not. So sometimes you can just take it out of that nest and put it in the other way. So instead of saying that the author has a name and the author has an address, then you restate that as author name and author address. And by the time you stuck that into your term reference, it all makes sense and uses up a lot less data, and is easier to understand. Something that took me a little while to wrap my head around is I kept thinking of the data in the old way, and this is new data, so instead of trying to nest it, don't. There are just other ways to think about it. And then the EDTF conversion that we're talking about, and again, Seth can speak some of the nightmares involved. There's just some weird stuff in there. I always assumed 21 was a year. It's not, it's a season. What the hell? Why would they do that? So yeah, you've got to know the code, and there's ways of writing that. So the conversion, sometimes you can come up with mapping for it, but there's just a whole lot of getting dirt under your fingernails and doing them one by each. And I suppose in an emergency, you could just stick them in as a text field and then convert them to EDTF at your leisure if you had to move them fast. But it's yeah, just don't. This is an excellent example of where in the transitional process you can use this to clean up your data. You can use it to improve your data. You can make it more searchable. You can make it more reasonable. You can make it easier to facet reliably.
One of the things I've done for clients is in my pre-processing Python script, if I can't do anything with the date to automatically convert it, I just print out a log, say, the identifier, here's the date value.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do this by hand.
Nice.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a YP. So post ingest. It's the VBOs we were just talking about. Extremely powerful tool. You can use it for all kinds of cleanup. I just like them. I use them all the time. And if you set up the right filter on your views, as Danny's pointed out, they're not super good for doing super large data sets. But if you've got a super large data set that needs the same value change in every one, you've probably goofed somewhere along the line. It's one of the reasons that I like doing entity references so much. Is you've got a term wrong, you change it in one place, you don't change it in 300 places. And again, with term consolidation, by the time you've gone, you're going to find a whole lot of things that are really similar. Names that were, and again, talk to your repository manager about this, because sometimes you've got a pluralized version of something that you assume is a mistake and it's not. They mean totally different things. Subject and subjects may or may not mean the same thing. So it's figured out. But once you've got that, it's you can use VBOs to consolidate, and there's various modules for that. And then it's just auditing and testing and editing. It's an iterative process. It's over and over again, which is again, as Danny stressed earlier, why we like to do a lot of small test batches.
Take this one. So here's some serious gotchas to take into consideration. All right. So at Discovery Garden, like Luke, they've managed to do some tricks to avoid some of this, but at the end of the day, you are going to need a lot of space. If you have a lot of stuff and you have to get that stuff somewhere else, you know, like at some point in time, there's going to be 2 copies of them. If you're really not careful or very naive, you will have 3 copies of everything, because you will dump it out somewhere and then you will take that, and then from that you will go put that into your new Islandora, and so there are now 3 copies of all of this stuff. So like, you just have to be aware. Like if you've got a lot of stuff, you're going to need to pony up for more storage to hold it for a bit, right? And it's it. Logically, it just works that way. Too many fields. That's something I hear a lot. Big criticism. Oh, Drupal, but you can only add so many fields, and then it will start to be terrible. I have actually found this to not really be true. So it will definitely crack up when it hits a certain point, when there's too many fields. But then there's a PHP setting that if you just jack it, you know, like, fine. So it's max input vars. And like what it is, the way you find out when you've got too many fields is that the forms won't save. So like you go and you get like every solar field and you just jam all the things in there. All of a sudden you've got too many fields and you go to save it and it just like spins and like doesn't save. That's the tip off that you've got too many fields. And just go jack that value. Everything's fine. never seen it be too slow. Let me put it that way. Okay, so I guess like Alexander's talking about, it's just like a, what do you call it? Like it's that old story that just like keeps living. And we see this a lot in Islandora. Like people will complain about something and then we'll fix it, and then like 3 years later you'll hear someone repeat that thing that had been fixed like 3 years ago. But it's just that's how it was when they got used to it, and that's it. And so yeah, so that's something you hear about Drupal. Too many fields. Well, that's not true. Yeah, do you have all your derivatives? So this is a really good thing. Like after you do this massive ingest, one of the reasons why we suggest you do small is because if you already have all your files and you're taking like all of your files over from like an i7 to an i8, then this is not really a problem because you had all of the files. But if you're coming from something else and you just get like the originals, it's gonna kick off this like firestorm of derivative generation, right? And things happen. Like we've done big ingests and had that thing run for weeks and everything would be fine and it all came out fine. And we've done it again and it wasn't nearly as big of a data set, but because like the server specs were different or whatever, you know what I mean? Like this thing just like crashed and tumbled and OCR didn't get made, thumbnails didn't get made on various objects and there was no rhyme or reason to it. And you don't want to wipe it all out and start all over again. So like Seth wrote a view filter that you can use. It is in Islandora now. If you get the latest Islandora and you update to it, it is there. And you just, in your view, you go in the filter section and you click add new filter and it's there. It's called Node has media. You fill it out and then it's like, what are you looking for? So it'll say, does this node have an original file? Yes, but like, does it have the OCR extracted text? Does it have the thumbnail? Whatever. You can click which ones you want, and you can even negate it and be like, show me the ones that don't have this. So if you negate that, then you can very easily be like, find me all the nodes that didn't get a thumbnail. And then if you have VBO, all the stuff we wrote were actions. So then once you have that, you can just like click a button and just regen all your thumbnails. So like it's very important. That's a huge improvement that Seth did. Like it's monstrous. And we, for a long time, were trying to figure it out. And I was trying to figure it out in particular and could not do it using standard Drupal core views. And right as I'm about to just like give up, Seth just like shows up and it's like, hey, check this out. Here it is,
I remember a white horse.
It works perfectly.
I remember a white horse.
Yeah. Here's that thing, 2 tickets to that thing you always wanted to go see. It's like, oh, gee, thanks,
I will give you a caveat on additional files. There's a couple of things. Sometimes you decide you just want to generate new derivatives, and sometimes you want to bring the old ones across. And Workbench will absolutely allow you to bring in as many data streams as you like and put them wherever you want. So you can bring your OCR over. I prefer bringing OCR over rather than generating it on the fly because it's often been edited, and you're going to bring the edited version across, which is what you want. The other thing is, if you are generating OCR, either because it doesn't exist or you want it fresh, it will absolutely work. But if you're doing a big spreadsheet, you could well be kicking off 24 or 48 hours worth of derivative as your microservices chug away in the background. And the queue will handle it, but the JWT is going to expire. So make absolutely sure you set your JWT to something really generous. I go at least 3 days on sites where I'm doing migrations.
I think 3 months is mine. I give it
All
just
right.
3 months. I'm just like, whatever, just, please work. Yeah, that's a really good gotcha. I should add that to the slide. So I think that's burned everyone once, is that you'll do it, and then, none of your derivatives work.
And the way it's set up, it's everything's tried 5 times if it doesn't work. So you've made this request, it moves the file across, looks for the JWT. It says, are you sure? Let's try this one again with the same number. And so it just takes forever to clean that out. So if you've got your queue set up where you can monitor it, you can go in and clean that queue out. But yeah, that'll burn you. And the other thing, even on other things, is sometimes you decide whether it's less work to create a new one or bring the old one in. So if you've got something, I tend to create new fits because that's super fast most of the time. And actually, this is absolutely an aside, but I would like to rewrite that to a certain extent because the way it works now, video files are the big ones. Is if you're getting the fits data from a video file, it's really only reading the first few blocks of the file, but it's going to move all 18 megs or whatever it is down to the microservice, which then takes all 18 megs and sends it out to the website, then pulls it all back. It takes forever. So there's ways of rationalizing that. Anyway, that's just.
Yeah. So last thing maybe, because we are kind of running out of time here. I mean, there's probably questions.
We've got 11 minutes and 24 seconds.
But so this link here, I didn't want to put the solution in there because it's, gross looking. But like, you're gonna hit this eventually. So you need to be aware of this. So if you do some migration and then you've got like 2 million things, you've got some pretty large number of things in there, you're gonna start to notice the database is gonna start getting creepy. At some point in time, you will actually get so large that when it tries to update the cache, it will run into horrible, horrible, horrible problems where you've saved something. As you've saved it, it's like, I'm gonna go update the cache. Well, when you saved it, it took out a lock. When you go to update it, it takes out a lock. And now you're in deadlock zone. And it only happens when you get like really big, So this link here, if you click on that, it's so super easy to fix this. And it's kind of like the #1 easiest way to just like make sure you're gonna work is to get this set up by default. There's an issue to make all Drupal installs have this by default, okay? And they just don't. And all you have to do is put this one, it should take you straight to the comment. Oh, there it was, I saw it. Go down. Oh yeah, it's been going for a while. We see a block, that one right there. This database is defaulting. You need to put this before you even start. Like you want to have that there. And it will eventually, when they figure out how to make all of the parties happy to get things done, it'll be there. But if you're using MySQL, good Lord, you need that. Eventually it's just going to blow up in your face. And so if you just get that out of the way now, it's going to save you a lot of heartache later, for sure. Love this. So this is, I think, like the battle that we always are dealing with. You are never going to get this right the first time. You're probably not going to get it right the 50th time. So you have to kind of get the imperfections, like what is it called, wabi-sabi, where something's not quite perfect, but it can still be beautiful. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful even. You just sort of have to accept the fact that if you try to make this perfect, you will never get done, ever. At some point in time, you just have to say, all right, this is it. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Here's what I can do for you now. And you got to do it. Sometimes you got to do something. It's better than just sitting there and spinning your wheels trying to make sure that it's like always going to be perfect and exactly right. So you'll get a lot of like, I think you mentioned this in one of the earlier slides. You have to like define the scope. You really have to define the scope. And then when you're done trying to define the scope of what you're trying to do, you just have to accept that you are going to be going over it again with the second pass. Just kind of shoulder that burden and keep moving. You're never going to get done.
Yeah, and it again varies project by project. If you've got a collection of your slides from last summer's vacation, it doesn't matter if you've got the names and dates and people right. You're close enough, that's fine. And if you're doing something of academic importance, especially where people's reputations are at stake, you better get it right. So it's figure your scope, and there's no right or wrong answer to this. I think it was Leonard Cohen famously was once asked when he knew his poems were done. They said, they're never done, they're just abandoned.
Code. It's a bunch of things. Your house, you know?
Yeah.
You're always working on it. I guess that's it. We managed to fill the space pretty well. There's 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Katie, do you want to come up and read that right into the microphone?
Talking about the lovely Bethany, right?
I am.
I know.
And she was wonderful. She's wonderful. She may be listening. Decentralized logging. Drupal will keep logs of objects being added by a user, but won't identify them as being part of an ingest. Each client ingest app will have a log, but those will be on each client's machine. There will not be one central place a user could look to learn about all the ingests. But one of the things she said was, this is a developing tool and we want to keep our eye on it. So that was one thing that stuck in my head. Like, has that, no. Okay.
No, it's
Okay.
you still
No
just
issue.
get the log and that's it.
Yeah.
We could aggregate them and put them somewhere as like a after process kind of deal, but there's no way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you have different people on different computers doing different things.
The workaround for that, and this isn't in the code, this is just best practices, and this actually speaks to something else that I didn't mention earlier. There's this funny thing with deleting nodes that it has to be over a RESTful interface. It has to be deleted by whoever put it in there. So best practices are to do your dev work at home, figure out what you want. By the time you're ready to go to prime time, have one directory on one server that everybody uses with the same name, same creds. So I tend to go with migrator because then you know that it's migrated, and that way all the logs are consolidated to one place. Now they're not available from the Drupal interface, but if you want those logs and you want to query them, they're pretty complete. So you just know where to store them. It's also a good thing. The config file tells you what logs to use. And if that log is already there, it will just append to it. Depending on sometimes that's fine. And sometimes you might want to go in and date stamp that. So say this particular job did this, and the logs are very complete. They tell you what went in, what terms were created, what the new nodes are, what the new media is, how to get to those, what the source was, the name of the file. It's pretty complete, but there's a way of consolidating all that.
I'm gonna look right here. There was someone, our mouse here? Yes. Do we limit Workbench access with users or just let them run wild?
Oh, let them run
Well,
wild.
I don't know.
What could go wrong?
But yeah, what's the worst that could happen? You know, weaponized bees. How could that go wrong, right? Like,
Workbench suffers from
The audio just died, by the way.
okay, I was keeping up. I could have summarized that. I was on it.
Okay, so the problem is that
That microphone.
Aside from the obvious that that's a very bad idea, ha ha ha. Python itself, like one of the things that, and I think hopefully someone could raise an issue with Mark because I know he'll respond and he will patch this. One of the things that Islandora Workbench could benefit from is use of VENV, like a virtual environment, or that we Dockerize it, because essentially what happens is it's left to users to have to manage all of the dependencies, and that breaks super easily, as well as if you install things as sudo, it's a nightmare for a sysadmin. Now, I get that Mark would probably counter with a very good point, which is, hey, I can't program from every single edge case, and I agree with that. So unfortunately, it falls into a bit of a crack for a user. And essentially what happens is you can run the tool once, someone will log in somewhere else, update the libraries, and then you have a real mess on your hands potentially. So I think maybe the positive thing to come out of this is for someone to log an issue where we can continue this debate. Mark and Alan and others can jump in and say, okay, here's our experience. And we can try to work forward to, seeing if there's a good fit. And
I like the Docker idea,
yeah,
except for those servers that don't have Docker.
well, I think it's probably this could come out to like a documentation thing where it says, hey, if you're in this type of use case where you can't use Docker, here are the steps that you can take.
Yeah, right.
And the virtual environment for Python is also a really, that's the way most Python developers use it, like meaning that they contain the requirements within an environment. That could be a solution too. So perhaps to your point, we can just come up with like 3 scenarios, and then beyond that, users can begin to update the documentation themselves. So.
Relatedly, and I don't know if the microphone can pick me up from here or not. So I recently left UNLV, and I did not want to leave them with Migrate API, because handing that over to someone was not going to fly at all. But I decided let's hand over Islandora Workbench. So talking about letting users run wild with it. What we did is I had 2 point people in digital collections who were the managers who quality control everything. They're the ones that I taught to, here's how you run check. Here's how to run and check the logs to see what's going on. And here's the Slack if you need to get a hold of Mark or me later to get questions. But we have students filling out these spreadsheets and they make mistakes, which is why the students don't run Workbench. They hand it to someone to do a quick quality control in Workbench check before those staff members run it on their own machine. So you can, yes, don't let people run wild with it. Put your workflows in place. But I did hand off Workbench to quote unquote non-technical staff who are, as far as I've heard, are doing okay with it. At least they were doing fine when I left.
Yeah, we've got librarians. Yes.
Yeah.
I get a lot of phone calls, but
Yeah, our project managers will run it too. It's just, like, you don't have to be super technical, but you just have to like not want to stab your eyeballs out if you see a terminal. And I think if you can live with it. We have time now?
we are.
I just have a quick question, and that is, I've always thought that most people run Workbench just as one user running Workbench and not sharing it with a team. Do a lot of people share it with a team? That seems like a mess to me, but okay.
I've got a few different places where that happens, and it works really well. You just don't. You just make sure you control it.
Lost you after control.
Lost you after control.
Oh,
We're having technical difficulties.
yeah. Sorry. Saying if you can keep the number manageable, it's and it'd be easy to set up kind of related things. I like having something in the logs that indicated it was part of an ingest. So I use the migrator as the Drupal user with all the available roles. One last thing that has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about so far, but just came up on the Slack channel the other day. Make sure whoever is using whatever role you're logged in as, make sure they have Fedora admin, or bad things are going to happen.
Right.
That was
I really want to thank Alan and Danny and everyone, Seth and everyone else, Luke and everyone else who contributed to this. This has been a just fabulous session. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I think we need to link out the slides. I saw someone asking for a link to the slides. So we can definitely put the slides in the public drive that Isabella's got set up, and we'll do that. And you can always hunt us down on Slack if you can't find anything.
I will do that. So sometime within the next 10 minutes when I can get my edging roam back on, I will do that.
Something we're going to do is
Luke's gonna do something.
Luke is like, he's like me, he's buffering. He's like, I haven't done it yet, so I don't want to promise this, but you know.
So we have a client that has over 100 terabytes of data, and they've had a lot of issues with derivatives. So one of the requirements is they cannot regenerate derivatives. So something that we're going to do before the end of this year is keep everything as is in Fedora, and using the Foxmol through the Fly system, we're going to make it so that basically there's file entries in Drupal and everything will stay as is in the original Foxmol. And they'll have another folder structure that would be for new stuff as it comes into the system. That way they don't have to get double the storage space.
Yeah.
So this is a goal. It hasn't been done yet. Like the project's underway, but I will let people know how it goes towards the end of the year.
Do you have to, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, yeah.
So we might have to write custom context
Sounds
Oh,
like
yeah, sure.
because it's like, otherwise it'll be firing, or we may have to just do it and clear the queue. And so it doesn't try to regenerate derivatives on top of the other stuff.
Yeah. That's totally normal. Yeah. So that's another thing, I guess, to mention. If you don't want derivatives coming over, you got to go tell it to not make derivatives.
turn the context off.
Turn the context off. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll just put it out there. I'll let people know how it goes.
Awesome.
That's
Luke.
super interesting tech problem. I like that. I don't want to bug blah, 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 blah. I can't speak. I don't want to bog everything down with questions for Luke. I will repeat that. So what he's saying is that Red Hat doesn't ship with Docker, and depending on your payment plan with them, you will not get Docker CE. You will get Red Hat's enterprise flavored version of Docker.
That Red Hat is trying to ship to something called
Okay, so yeah, so Red Hat's trying to shift you into their
Yeah.
paid solution.
Sorry, this is Wade Collins. I asked the question. Yeah, exactly. Like we had to go with Ubuntu for like a proof of concept.
Gavin's coming up here to talk. Wade.
Just to continue the flame war here, which is to say that shops can't have choice about using Fedora-based. Fedora is in Red Hat-based. You just need to pick something that's not specifically Red Hat, like CentOS, Rocky Hill, whatever the the new Baskin-Robbins flavors of Fedora-based should do just fine, and you shouldn't feel like you have to use Debian or Ubuntu. It will work. You just need the official Docker-CE release.
Yeah, which we couldn't get that to work on Rail 7 or Rail 8 box. I think we tried both.
Yeah, I believe the technical term for that affair is a Southern charming term called "that dog doesn't hunt." So don't do it on Red Hat, period.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Not quite. Wait. Full Southerner here. I'm just gonna correct that. It's that dog won't hunt.
that dog
Dog won't hunt.
Yep, I know that term.
Red
the
Hat's
dog
a
will
pig
not
in a
hunt.
poke.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is because like we're kind of a Red Hat shop, and so like if we go with like Ubuntu or whatever, something other than Red Hat, then that's an outlier. It's an outlier for like our monthly updates and stuff, or upgrade or whatever.
I don't know what you get if you give like your firstborn child to the Oracle overlords. Like they might give it to you. I'm not sure if you pay like the full on premium, So no, he's saying okay. Wade's saying no. All right.
It's above my pay grade.
I mean, for me, Red Hat and Windows are in the same box. They're stuff that we just won't work with because they're incredibly frustrating and difficult to deal with. So we recommend companies we don't like to take on those projects.
Gotcha.
I think you should be okay with Fedora though. That's what Gavin was getting at. You can,
Yeah.
yeah, you can get something close, something that
Yeah.
uses Yum. Yeah. Okay. All right. Are we good? Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you
Good session.
again.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone's participation.